The message, "You're not invited." The text arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Short, clean, final. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I read it again, waiting for the second message, the correction, the explanation, the wrong chat follow-up. Nothing came, just those 3 words. "You're not invited." And it wasn't from a distant relative or an event coordinator. It was from my mother. I stared at the screen longer than I'd like to admit, not because I didn't understand the sentence, but because I didn't understand the reality behind it. My younger brother's wedding was in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And I was just finding out I wasn't part of it. I called her. She answered quickly, almost like she expected it. "Mom, what do you mean I'm not invited?" There was a pause. Not confused. Prepared. "It's complicated," she said. Complicated. That word families use when the explanation is uncomfortable. Then simplify it. I replied calmly. Another pause. Then the truth, or at least her version of it. "Your brother thinks it would be better if you didn't attend." The sentence didn't land emotionally at first. It landed logically. Better? Better? For who? Why? I asked. "It's his day," she said. "There's already been tension." Tension? Now, I was genuinely confused. My brother and I hadn't argued. We hadn't fought. We barely even disagreed. In fact, the last major conversation we had was about paperwork. Property paperwork. Because 8 months earlier, I had gifted him something most siblings never do. A house. Not symbolic help. Not a partial contribution. A fully paid property worth $770,000. No loan. No conditions. No repayment. Just support. He had been struggling financially after a failed business attempt, and I didn't want him starting his marriage buried under pressure. So I helped, quietly, privately, without announcing it to relatives, because real help doesn't need an audience. At the time, he had hugged me tightly, said, "I'll never forget this." But memory, I was learning, can shift when circumstances change. What tension? I asked again. My mother exhaled. "He feels uncomfortable." With what? With how things look. That sentence finally moved something inside me. How what looks? Another pause. Then the real answer surfaced. Some of her family thinks the house makes him look dependent. There it was. Not conflict. Perception. Not reality. Image. Suddenly, everything became clearer. This wasn't about family. This was about optics. Someone, somewhere, had decided that my help didn't look good in wedding photos. And instead of addressing insecurity, they removed the reminder. Me. I didn't react emotionally, didn't argue, didn't remind her about the paperwork, the transfer taxes, the months of planning, because none of that mattered anymore. Narratives are stronger than facts when pride is involved. "So he asked you to tell me?" I said, "Yes." Not even a call. Not even a conversation. Just a filtered message. That told me everything. "I understand." I replied. And I meant it. Not because I agreed. Because I finally saw the situation clearly. When generosity collides with insecurity, generosity often gets erased. "I'm sorry," my mother added softly. "I'm not upset," I said calmly. That part surprised even me, because in that moment, something shifted. Not anger. Perspective. I ended the call and placed my phone on the table. Then I looked across the room at the framed document hanging quietly on the wall. The property transfer certificate. Signed. Stamped. Completed. Proof of a gift that no longer seemed welcome. I didn't feel regret, but I did feel clarity. Respect, I realized, isn't guaranteed by generosity. And gratitude isn't permanent when pride feels threatened. 3 weeks from now, there would be a wedding. Music. Photos. Speeches. Celebration. and one silent absence. They thought removing me would simplify the story. They had no idea what I was about to simplify next. The quiet adjustment. For the first few days, nothing changed. At least, not on the surface. I still went to work, still followed my routines, still moved through the same structured days that had taken years to build. But internally, something subtle had shifted. Not anger, not disappointment, alignment. When someone tells you clearly where you stand, confusion disappears. And clarity, while sometimes uncomfortable, is incredibly efficient. I didn't call my brother. I didn't send a message asking for an explanation, because the explanation had already arrived. Not invited. Simple decisions deserve simple responses. Instead, I reviewed something far more practical. The paperwork. 8 months earlier, when I had gifted him the house, my financial advisor had suggested an additional layer of protection, nothing aggressive, nothing controlling, just structured documentation to ensure long-term stability. At the time, I almost declined it. After all, this was family. But structure isn't about distrust. It's about clarity. So we had placed the property under a transitional holding agreement for the first year, standard practice for large asset transfers, especially when tax positioning and liability protection are involved. Technically, the house had been gifted. Emotionally, it was his. But legally, the transfer wasn't fully finalized yet. There were still 4 months remaining before the title would convert permanently. I hadn't thought about that detail once since the day we signed it. Until now, I opened the digital folder and reviewed the documents carefully, not searching for leverage, not looking for advantage, just understanding reality. The agreement included one simple clause. If the receiving party requested formal separation of financial association within the first 12 months, the asset would automatically revert until a new structure was defined. At the time, it was included to protect against external disputes, marriage-related complications, or financial instability. Ironically, it had nothing to do with conflict between us. But circumstances change, and clarity reveals timing. Over the next 2 weeks, I heard occasional updates through relatives, wedding planning stress, budget adjustments, discussions about independence and presentation. I noticed a pattern. My name wasn't mentioned negatively. It simply wasn't mentioned at all. Erasure is quieter than criticism, but more informative. Then, 5 days before the wedding, I received an email, not from my brother, from his future father-in-law. Short, formal, carefully worded. He wanted clarification about the property structure for documentation purposes. That was the moment everything aligned. Not emotionally, legally, because now the request wasn't symbolic. It was official, and official requests activate official processes. I didn't react immediately. I didn't escalate. I simply forwarded the message to my advisor and asked one question. What happens if they want complete financial separation? The reply came 30 minutes later. Clear, neutral, precise. The property returns to your holding structure until a new agreement is signed. No drama, just process. For the first time since that Tuesday afternoon text, I smiled slightly, not because of revenge, because of symmetry. They wanted independence. And independence, when done properly, requires clean lines. 3 days later, the paperwork was prepared. I still hadn't contacted my brother, because this wasn't about confrontation. It was about consistency. If perception mattered more than reality, then reality would quietly adjust. The wedding was now only days away. They believed removing me simplified the story. What they didn't realize was that the story was still being finalized.